Hello, Chris. How are we?
Excellent. Yeah. Good morning so far. How are you
Good
doing?
morning, exactly. And we can see it's a good morning because there's a lot of sunshine behind you.
Yeah. I mean, this is really not doing it justice. It is very grey and miserable.
I was just thinking that as I said it, I was looking out the window. I was like, God, it's miserable outside. So anyone in the UK listening will be going, yes, that's my view too. And anyone outside of the UK is probably going, that's not what I've said.
Yeah.
Oh, Chris. So thank you so much for joining on the podcast. And from our first call, it was really good to learn that you've got a really solid sales background, right? Really solid sales. And actually, we've got the same beginnings, the same beginnings of door to door. But no, sorry, not door to door, face to face. Mine was door to door, and yours was in the shopping centres and this type of thing. Um, what was it selling again? Remind me what you were selling.
It was electronic cigarettes when they were first becoming a thing.
Oh, really? I bet that was actually quite good to sell.
It was because it was a fun bit of tech. People were interested in it. Um, so many skeptics though. I mean, obviously in this kind of thing, you just go through so many sales conversations every day, right? But then the majority are going to be no. Most of them are no because they don't want to speak to a salesperson. But the ones that were sort of inviting some conversation were rubbish. Why would I want that? I've got the real thing. So the vast majority of what I was doing was overcoming negatives all the time, with people just throwing it out instantly without even trying it. So that was the really fun bit of like trying to get into. Oh, okay. Well, here's a conversation. Let's see where it can go. And on
Interesting.
proper characters. Really
Yeah.
years.
And what did you find that the process outside of obviously having to learn to turn a lot of objections? I remember the way that we got told to turn objections was smile and agree. I completely understand where it came from. A lot of people tell us exactly the same thing. The reason why they decided to buy it was
Yeah.
right, and then you give 3 benefits and close. Well, basically, to me, I think e-cigarettes. To me, the biggest selling point is you don't fucking stink of smoke. I think regardless of any health, all that kind of stuff. It's just not smelling of smoke because I used to smoke, and as a door-to-door salesperson, I used to smoke. And now, because I don't smoke anymore, now when I look back at that, I go, "Oh, how did people let me in their house?" Like I would have been, especially most people weren't smoking, right? So going into a household as a smoker, you would have really smelt of smoke. So I think that to me would have been the biggest. What did you find was the biggest selling point when you were selling it?
Yeah. There were two things that used to come up quite a lot that would really connect with people. One was in terms of the conversation would be to, like you just said, you agree, but then you provide, well, the reason why most people think that, it works for them is because they're actually using it as a transition. So for most people, you might be the same here that, this is me going back a few years trying to remember the pitch. You might be the same that the couple of cigarettes that you really enjoy every day are the first one in the morning and the one after the evening meal, right? They
Mm,
agree. And then, well, keep them for the moment. If you're not worried about quitting tomorrow, keep hold of those. All the others that are just habit, it's like you're bored and stuff. You just replace it with this, and then all of a sudden you've got something which is a more healthy way of doing it. And yeah, that's where the conversation goes. And people like that idea. It's like, oh, okay, well, my guard's down now. You're not telling me to stop. You're saying actually
yeah.
it's something that you can do as part of something else that I already enjoy.
That is such a good idea, such a good pitch, interestingly, because I think the same thing would apply to people who are trying to promote alcohol-free drinks. Because there's one that keeps coming in my Instagram feed called Imposter Brew, and I'm keeping going, "Oh, I should try this out," 'cause they're like the way they advertise is quite good. They're like, "It's gonna have the same relaxing effect." So you can still feel like you're chilling out for the evening without it actually having any alcohol content. So really fascinating, really fascinating. So Chris, tell me, what is it you do now? So obviously you're a long way since having done the sales in e-cigarettes. What do you do now?
So nowadays, I run a business called Safer Charging. So we look at electric vehicle charging points and specifically the maintenance of them. So one of the things which I've been in this particular bit of industry, EV charging, for a good few years now, 8 or 9 years. And the thing which I learned over that time is that we're still got a long way to go. Like, depending on what numbers you look at, we're kind of 3% of the way there, with the amount of charge points that are in the ground before we get to this big milestone of 2030, where the ban on new sales of internal combustion engines comes in. So there's a lot more charge points that need to go in the ground, and there's a lot that have already been gone in, and the technology has changed so much over the years that I've been involved with it, that there are different practices developing, different bits of kit there that are either new bells and whistles or doing things in different ways. People's habits and attitudes towards the industry have changed as well. One thing that hasn't changed is that these things need to operate for 7 or 8 years as part of their serviceable life. And it's not that bit of the industry hasn't developed well enough yet. So it's the bit that I really want to help people with, that they're not going through all the effort of transitioning a fleet or deciding where to put their infrastructure and putting their hand in their pocket to, big money installs in some occasions, and then just leaving them in the ground and waiting for the best to happen or the worst in a horrible scenario. This is where I help them understand exactly what they need to be doing after the fact, or indeed beforehand, help them plan those installations and transitions correctly before they even get to installation. So yeah, I mean, I could chat about electric vehicles for.
Yeah, no, I think it's a how did you get into that?
It was,
because it's quite a niche.
It's so when I first went for it, I'd finished up with a job, having moved to the city, and I thought, I'm going to be one of those guys that marches down London Bridge every day, and I would like suited and booted, and I was loving it. But then the reality sunk in that this isn't quite my life. So what I thought I was going to go into in some sort of financial world was really not suited to me. So I was looking for other stuff that kind of fitted an environmental objective that I wanted to get to. So a lot of what my early career was doing was around environmental science. I studied that at university, and I went on to do some work with recycling with the local council. So that was in the back of my mind. I still wanted to bring that back in at some point. And I saw this advert for a job going for an electric vehicle charging company. At that time, I had no clue. And I probably should say, I have no interest in vehicles at all. Like the cars themselves, great, they go faster and they're safer, and yeah, great, well done. I'm really not that bothered about vehicles. I'm more bothered about the transition to an exciting future of renewables and the way that the energy ecosystem all fits in together. I find that absolutely fascinating. So that's the bit that got me, and I was like, yeah, I could get on board with that. Went and pitched an idea to the business, and they loved it, and yeah, and then the rest was history. Stayed with it. I find it absolutely fascinating, and it's lovely having been there at the start, or very near the start of that industry moving on in the UK as well.
That's really interesting. I think what's lovely to hear in that story is that you've managed to find a way to make money doing something you're really passionate about, because I think that is a very widespread difficulty in general. And it's also not just the ability to you know what you're passionate about. You found a way to make money doing the thing that you're really passionate about, and maybe even more importantly, you made a concrete decision. I'm not going to do something that doesn't resonate with me. And I think I've seen so many people really close to me, as well as people I just meet, that stay in positions that they can hate just because the money is quite good, right? And everything serves a purpose. And sometimes in someone's life, it can be the right decision to be in a high position, in a high earning position, but to stay in it for decades, hating every day, is to me like such a wasted life, considering, 70% of your life is at work, right? So, both in an age range perspective, but also your daily, your hours that you're awake is at work. So I think I think that's absolutely amazing. So diving into the sales of these EV charging, so if you're you're primarily talking to businesses, right? So you're talking to businesses about their EV charging infrastructure because they're thinking about or have already transitioned away from the typical diesel petrol engines and now moving into EV charging. Are they doing that because legally there's a requirement to do that? So is that because the new legislation, like you said, is coming out in 2030? So they're going to have to do it anyway. So actually, this is a prime moment for you to get in on this market. Is there any other benefits to a company to do that?
Yeah, there's loads of reasons that people would be getting in on this. So you will probably have seen that a lot of the early EVs that went on the roads were people driving flash Teslas. There's a fancy Porsche out there, and there's all sorts of premium tier cars that hit the market, and they were taken up by typically the C-suite executives of businesses because there were some serious tax advantages to be able to drive these vehicles, particularly if you can put it against the salary sacrifice through the business. Then you're in a really advantageous position. And it's way cheaper than the equivalent premium vehicle. And then you look at all the ongoing costs, like the cost to fill them up and stuff. Unless you're just charging purely on public network rapid charging, it's considerably cheaper, very little maintenance, all these sorts of things. So there is a really strong cost argument, particularly in those early days for tax incentives. And now we're looking at vehicles or pretty much at price parity. There are market segments now which are equivalent or perhaps even slightly cheaper on the road price for a vehicle for someone to be getting into an EV. And then people don't like looking at the ongoing costs of stuff, right? So an equivalent I like making is if you're looking at buying a new TV and one's slightly more expensive than the other, but one's got a better efficiency rating, the more expensive one's got a better efficiency rating. You might think, well, fine, I'll go with the cheaper one because it's otherwise equivalent. But you're probably going to have that TV for the next 5, 6, 7 years or whatever it might be. And over that period of time, the one that was more efficient would actually have saved you way more than the ticket price of that first one that you end up going for.
Interesting.
Same sort of thing, logic for an electric vehicle, but you end up realizing that much sooner. And when you're spending 50, 60 quid fill up at the petrol station versus £5 or something like that to fill your EV, it starts adding up pretty quickly. So yeah, there's some good cost savings to be had as well for people.
Interesting. It's funny because I remember when the gas and electric prices started to skyrocket. Part of me was really pissed off, and the other part of me was quite pleased because typically speaking, people learn best through their pockets. So unless you make a direct impact financially to someone, change just doesn't happen. So if you say to the world, oh, well, we all need to only have this much water in our kettle so that we can save enough electricity to power all of the streets, right? And they go, I don't fucking care. You go, well, that cup of tea is now going to cost you 20 quid. You go, I'll fucking fill it up to here. So, and I think being able to correlate direct savings to a business makes total sense, right? And I think and it's one of those things that I yesterday, for some reason, I heard this saying twice, which was, if it's worth doing it, why not do it today? Yeah. And I think that is perfect for this industry, so if you do have a fleet of cars or even a fleet could be 2 cars, right? So you might have 2 sales guys out on the road, but if there's a cost saving advantage, it makes sense to do it now, assuming your lease terms are, coming to a close. And I think that's probably the main thing for most businesses is you have to wait until the lease term is out, right? And then you can look at what kind of infrastructure. So what are some of the challenges? I'd imagine, because I remember I was looking at getting an electric car myself, right? And I think I am a car guy, right? So one of the benefits of, and my girlfriend, she's just got a hybrid. And I decided to get a BMW. And she got a Hyundai Tucson, which is, I don't know how to pronounce it, Toucan, Tuscan, whatever it is. And because it's a hybrid, it starts with electric and it's so much faster than my car. And I'm like, this is embarrassing. So this 4x4 is faster than my sporting BMW. And so there's a benefit in terms of it being a sporty car, or being a sporty car guy, that it's a faster car, right? The downside is at the time I was living in a top story apartment, and to charge it up would have been a fucking nightmare. So the EV charging thing, from a domestic perspective, especially when you live in a city, living in the center of Brighton, right? So living in Brighton, and your street parking. So even if there's like spotted, it's just, you've got to hope, and I hate the idea of only being able to charge my car on hope. Like, well, hopefully I can get a space next to a charging station. And so I'd imagine that for a business owner, because obviously I work from home, so it's not a big deal for me in general. But if I was a business owner, I think that would be my biggest concern, is like, is my team going to be able to charge up their car, in an effective way, an efficient way, not where they go, oh, I missed the sales meeting, or, I couldn't deliver that product today, something where it's really impacting. So what is it that companies can do to mitigate risk against that?
Well, you're absolutely right. These are completely different types of concerns. There might be some overlap, but the business has to think about it differently to what a consumer might, right? That's perfectly sensible. And I think, whereas a consumer is typically going to be limited by their typical parking scenario. So if that's yourself, that's, in an on-street, unassigned parking area, that is one of the trickiest to solve. It's not insurmountable by any stretch, but it is one of the trickiest to solve.
Mm-hmm.
In a business environment, you need to think about, is the duty cycle of that vehicle going to be covered by the equivalent that we're going to be putting in? Are we needing to refuel, top it up during its working day, or can it come back to base? Is that base back at the person's house? If so, can we put a charge point on the house? And there's all sorts of fun solutions now where, for instance, if you've got that scenario where a vehicle is taken back to the driver's house overnight, the driver doesn't typically want their electric bill to be spiking because of their business usage, right? So there are systems in place where you can have that charge point usage fit directly and separately billed to the business. It doesn't even touch your domestic energy.
Wow, that's good.
So there's all sorts of things that are on the market now to be able to enable this transition and to make it easier. Now, one of the things you mentioned there about is the on-street infrastructure. Now, there's so much more that's gone in over the last year. There's been a 35% increase in the amount of charge points that are out in the wild now, in the public domain. And that's going to increase considerably more because there's a thing called LEVI, local electric vehicle infrastructure scheme, which is all of the local authorities have basically been given a huge pot of money to go and roll out loads more on-street infrastructure. So that's all coming through over the next year and 2 years. We'll see loads more coming into those sorts of areas. And we already know that you'll have driven past stuff where you've got maybe like a brand that's got charge points at a service station, or they've developed an electric only forecourt, those sort of things. And there's lots of provision in places where you go as a destination. So supermarkets, theme parks, hotels, all these sorts of places. So the network is very much scaling up.
And I imagine it's only going to get better. It's like I use this bit of software called Go High Level, which is for agency owners. And one of the things that I've noticed over the years of using it is, if I'm just patient enough, the feature that I'm looking for, it will definitely be created. And I think what I'm hearing is basically exactly the same for the EV charging industry. It's like, if I'm just patient enough, there's going to be so many more EV charging stations, domestically, that I'll be able to have my electric car without it being any issue. So what are some of the objections you come across? So like when you're speaking to a company who's, thinking about this, why would they not do it?
There's so many that people come up with, and the vast majority are answerable. And unfortunately, there's been loads of disinformation that's hit the market, and mainstream media really hasn't done any favors because these then get perpetuated. The ideas get perpetuated.
What are some of those?
Things like the batteries don't last.
Right. Yeah.
So that's an important one, right? If you're thinking about actually buying a vehicle, if you're leasing it, do you really care if the battery is degraded a bit?
No.
Not? That risk is on the lease code. If you're buying an electric vehicle, yeah, absolutely something you care about. So the technology, the chemistry within the batteries is so far advanced over what your mobile phone is made from. And over the years, it's just become better and better and better. And the battery management system is so advanced. I mean, these things, they go through, I'm going to forget the mileage numbers now off the top of my head, but there's situations where you've had like cab drivers in EVs doing hundreds of thousands of miles, and the batteries are still degrading like 5%, 6%. And that means you've still got like 300 odd miles of usable range in there. And the second-hand market, I think it was a little bit scary to get started with. People weren't sure, and insurers weren't sure as to whether these things are still fit to hit the market, but absolutely they are. I've just seen a post today where there was the first on Auto Trader, I think the first Tesla Model 3 that's hit under 10 grand to buy.
Oh, really? Interesting.
It's, that is I'm not here to promote Tesla, but that is a fantastic vehicle for someone to pick up for under 10K. And that's what serves them for years and years. Those batteries are built to last.
I think that's a great thing to point out there. So if a cab driver can do, let's say 300,000, 100,000, let's say 100,000 miles, like the lifetime of a petrol or diesel car is typically, when you get beyond 100K, you go in, if I resell this, it's going to be $1,000. Like, it's going to be it would have lost nearly all of its value, right? At that point, normally, right? Depending on the model and things like that. I know Honda Civics back in the day, they just don't die, those things, right? So there are some exceptions, right? But I think that's a great point. And I think it's good that you brought that up, because that is definitely a misinformation, right? Because I would also be under that impression. And I'm also into environmental science, right? So I studied at college because I'm really into those things as well. So, but I also had the impression of, well, if my mobile dies, then my car will die. Simple as that, right? So I think that's a really, really important point, is knowing that the battery is going to last. Because I think the flip side is, you've got big companies that can afford to do this regardless, right? So if they lose money, there's still a budget to buy new. Whereas if you're, let's talk about the cab driver. Say the cab driver who's like one-man band, he needs to buy his own cab. Like, what do I go for? Do I go for electric or petrol? Or you've got man in a van, right? A man in a van could be your plumber, your builder, your carpenter, your electrician. So many people are employed in trade, and they would also have to make this decision. Does it make sense to go for an electric van now, or does it make sense? And from your experience, what would so if we had someone who's in trades or is, a single person driver, but uses their vehicle of any sort, does it make financial sense for them individually to go ahead and buy electric already?
For the cab driver, I would say almost definitely, because you're talking about the efficiency of that vehicle is, particularly when you're considering it over a good few years, you are having to factor in so fewer maintenance costs. There was a good example of this, right? I don't know why the mileage has never stayed in my head with these things, but there was an example, I think it was around the 100,000 mile mark, where a gentleman had driven an EV for that period, and his wife had driven a vehicle, I think it was. And at the end of that period, they both returned the vehicle, and the EV, the disc brakes on it were almost pristine, not touched, because it's all done with regenerative braking, basically. And the petrol vehicle, completely shot. They were needed replacing. So one example of an area of the vehicle which you're not having to constantly think about, all these moving parts that are in an internal combustion engine, something goes wrong, and an old Rover with a head gasket would be going constantly. There were issues that that become pervasive over time. And with the electric vehicles, because there's so few moving parts in them, they maintain themselves much better over that period. So yes, it's definitely something that you can invest in with more confidence that it's going to pay dividends to you long run. I think for that LCV market, it's really situational on who, at this point in time, who is driving that and what sort of mileage they're doing, what sort of capability they have to either take on a lease or purchase of that vehicle. It does change because the LCV market grew into sort of early maturity a few years after the passenger vehicle market. So for the cab driver, absolutely. And there's loads more stuff that we could go into with it, I suppose. But that's absolutely something that I would say, yes, definitely look into it properly. The LCV market, I think that, it might be the right vehicle for you, or it might be the next vehicle after the current change. It depends on the business.
I remember talking to a cab driver in London before, and he had a Tesla. And he leased the Tesla. Now, leasing a Tesla is like 1,400 to 1,800, depending on the model you go for, right? So it's an expensive lease. But he said that the cost of petrol would be more than the cost of the lease. So him driving a Tesla made more financial sense, even leasing it, than it did. And I was like, oh, that's fascinating and genius. It's a genius way of doing it, right? So, and has it been impacted? Because obviously gas electric prices have skyrocketed over the past two years. Has that made a big impact in the difference between the cost of petrol diesel to the cost of driving electric?
So yeah, it has. I think that there are still good offers on the market. So if you're smart about it, and this is one of the really good things about EVs, once you're driving one, you kind of connect with the idea of what a kilowatt hour is. Anyone that's pre EV driving will probably, they might have heard of the term. You don't really necessarily understand it unless you're in an industry that works. We've seen it on your electric bill, but okay, great. What is it? So once you kind of connect with that idea of this is a unit of energy, and you know how much the storage of energy, and you know how much that is costing, you're essentially just being charged different prices for the same movement of electrons through your life at different points, right? And it's all a matter of convenience. So you will pay considerably more for a very convenient fast charge at a service station versus being able to charge at home or an incentivized destination site. But when you're charging at home, you might well be able to take advantage of situations where the grid is actually in surplus. And so instead of exporting that energy through intercontinental grid connector, or paying a wind farm to turn off their turbines, the energy companies are actually able to say, who can take this energy off of our hands? And then you are being paid in some cases to charge your electric vehicle. This is the whole thing around the energy transition becoming so interesting, because we move to more of a micro generation scenario. So in a situation where you might be able to have solar panels on your roof, some battery storage, essentially your EV is just a mobile battery storage unit that is able to help transition that energy around and either add to the grid, take away from the grid, but just move that transition in a way which is helpful on a wider perspective. And you reap the benefits of that as a consumer or business that's able to help take some of that energy or offload it back to the grid.
That's fascinating. So let's imagine I bought an electric car today. How would I go about finding out about the one thing you spoke about there, which I was like, I'd do that, is getting paid to charge my car. Now, what's that called? It's not Economy 7, is it? What's that called?
No, so there are some energy companies out there and some charge point operators which work closely with these energy companies, or may have links to them, which are a lot of this is quite early stage. This isn't a widespread thing right now. It's not like you just go to your operator and the energy provider and say, pay me to charge my car. But they will often have a mechanism set up where you might have similar to an economy 7. It will be like from midnight until 5 a.m. or something like that, some sort of off-peak period where you can charge your vehicles more economically. Or it might be that there are, if you keep your vehicle plugged in and just let the energy company charge it when when it's advantageous for them or when the grid is greenest, you're then incentivized to do so through cheap tariff. But there are situations where if you're signing up to these programs where in exactly that scenario where the grid is in surplus and needs to offload some energy, you are then able to take that energy at that convenient time for them so that they can pay you a cheaper rate to charge your vehicle than they would otherwise have to pay someone to turn off those turbines or whatever it might be. I'm picking on the turbines. I don't know why. I do love them. But there are situations where people get paid a lot of money to turn things on and off just to help balance the grid.
That is a fascinating piece of information. Because I think there's definitely kind of a lack of education around how energy works and what the energy market has to offer. Economy 7, for example, a lot of people listening might not know what Economy 7 is. It was basically, it's a cheaper tariff after a certain time, and every company is slightly different, say 11 p.m. as an example, until say 5 p.m. or 6 p.m., which can be great if you've got energy storage heaters, which heat up at nighttime and then let out heat during the day without being turned on. Or if you want to do lots of your washing, your tumble drying at nighttime, and then it's much cheaper way of doing it. But it means you normally have a more expensive tariff during the daytime. So it's not the right thing for everyone. It wouldn't be the right thing for me because I work at home on computer all day. I have an electric blanket and heater and all the rest of it. So, but for some people, that makes total sense, and I'm all for that. So I think that'll be a really interesting thing for people to research. So if you're listening, you think about getting electric, like how can I get? Because I think it'd make people travel more. If you know you can travel for free, which is essentially what you would be doing, travel more.
Yeah, and because driving EVs is pleasurable, it's fun because you got the instant torque.
Yeah. It is fun for sure.
Quieter, these things are built for the enjoyment of it, and I think one of the things which we kind of touched on a bit there was this is really interesting for consumers. And let's face it, not everyone's going to be in that position where you can have solar panels and a battery and all that stuff. It's not going to work for everyone. But you can still be part of this by having your energy tariff linked in. So the consumer is able to be part of that journey. But for businesses as well, it's really interesting because depending on the size, of course, but you've got businesses out there which will be on tariffs which are situational as well to the time of day. And it might be that they have an upper limit of what they're able to draw from the grid. And above that, you get into serious peaky charges. And this is what they call it peak shaving, where there are methods where you can have as part of your microgrid, if you want to call it that you might be setting up, but essentially part of how your energy management system at your business works. You might well be able to set up a situation where you never have to hit those peak charges anymore because you're able to distribute the power either from your fleet of vehicles, which might not need to be out on the road at a certain time, or from a local battery storage system, or some way of linking all of that together so that you're actually able to balance out the power that your business needs as well. And so it can become really economical to be thinking about these things in a bigger way, rather than just the CEO can save a few quid because they can put it through the salary sacrifice scheme. So there's lots more that you can do with the cost savings and the environmental efficiencies of using your energy well.
I think that's great. And I think, that's why someone should phone you, because there's obviously a lot to know about, and there's a lot to research, and there's a lot to understand. And it's one of those things where I research things all the time, right? So I'm always researching, like, how can I, because I do sales automation. So I'm always researching, like, what's the newest tool? How does it work? And it benefits me directly to put in the hours in the day to do it. Learn how to do editing, for example, like we chatted about earlier, right? So all those things benefit me, and it benefits me putting my time and energy into that. However, I doubt very much it benefits the general business owner to spend hours and hours and hours and hours researching it when it's something that is only really going to be needed for an infrastructure and for purchasing, and then it's a hands off, right? So, it's dozens and dozens of hours, which actually, when you pay yourself an hourly rate, it works out costing you more money than having a conversation with someone who knows what to talk about. And that's why I'm always an advocate for people who are consultants, because I'm like, well, if you try and figure this out on your own, the cost of that is more expensive than the consultant, right? And I think this falls into the same bracket of, and if you can afford a fleet, you can afford a conversation, right? So it makes total sense to do it. So I think it makes, I think it's great. And what I like about it is that it's so linked to direct savings, because people learn through their pockets, right? Because most businesses, most people, not just businesses, are really in for personal gain, right? So that is the majority, right? So, or that is how can I make my life situation or my business better than what it is right now? And so when you can put a monetary amount to that, whatever that monetary amount is, then it makes sense to do it. And the added benefit is you're helping out the world, right? There's a secondary benefit, but my personal benefit is I am going to save some money. So I think that, because I remember years ago, because I am genuinely really into environmental science, I was wanting to start a business which was basically helping companies to find more cost-effective ways to do something in an environmentally friendly way. So whether that's buying recycled paper or whatever it is, right? So be able to walk into a business as a consultant and go, right, here I can save you 10 grand a month. And doing so means that you no longer have a carbon footprint, right? So what a wonderful thing to be able to do. But I recognize even then, and we're talking like 15 years ago, but even then, I recognize that the benefit to the business owner that's going to be most appealing is that they're going to save money. The secondary benefit is I save the world doing it.
Absolutely. And the other thing which is really important as part of this is that it's not just saving money from outgoings of your business, but in terms of winning new business, the amount of tenders now which are focusing on carbon emissions of the downstream suppliers. So if you're supplying to a business, whatever your service is, to be able to say as part of that, here are our emissions reduction because of what we've done with our electric fleet, that puts you in a much better position to be able to win that bid, because you're able to show categorically, if you choose us, your own emissions are by default reduced as well, because we're supplying your service or product in a more sustainable way. So it goes both ways there.
I'm going to pause there because that is a golden nugget of information that someone needs to digest, right? So recognizing that having EV charging can win you tenders. Now, tenders are enterprise level contracts. So we're talking hundreds of thousands, typically speaking. Very rarely would you go for a tender for 10 grand, right? So it's normally a 6-figure contract. So being able to win a tender because you've got EV chargers and a fleet of electric vehicles is a huge reason. If no other reason made sense, that reason on its own is a reason to do it. So if we now add up these financial benefits, you've got the benefit of saving money and potentially being paid by the grid to charge your own vehicles, right? So potentially, not definitely, but potentially. But then also it support you winning tenders. That is a great reason to be doing it, right? What other things have you found to be some of the biggest selling points when you're talking to a business or a business thinking about doing this? Maybe not someone who's already doing it because they're already kind of sold on it. They're like, how do I do it more efficiently, right? But a company that's just like pondering the idea of it. What are some of the things that they go, yeah, that's the one?
One of the things I really liked was there was a business who they run a large fleet of electrical service engineers, and they made a really good point that a lot of those people think when you ask them what their job is, that they say, well, I'm a service engineer that works on pylons, or I look at HV distribution or whatever it might be, right? They say that that's their job. In reality, they spend 99% of their day driving. They are drivers for a living. And the other percentage is their skilled bit of particular labor that they do. But the fact that when you think of it that way, why would you not put your drivers in the best possible vehicle that they can be in for the safety purposes, particularly because it also driving an EV actually encourages you to drive more safely, because you are looking at the way that you're braking. Instead of half braking events, you look at approaching roundabouts more slowly because you're regenerating that energy going into the vehicle. Or you're looking at the way that when you're cornering, because you've got the weight of the vehicle at the base, typically the battery is under the main vehicle platform. You've not got a very heavy bit of vehicle loaded into the front where the engine compartment normally is. So these vehicles are much less likely to turn over in event of some sort of collision or sharp turning event. So the cornering is much smoother. And there's all sorts of things that go into that. So if you're thinking about how do I improve the ability for my fleet to do their job, my staff to do their job correctly, actually thinking about it that way, that they are first and foremost drivers, then they do their bit of skilled labor on site. I thought was really refreshing.
I'm gonna pause there because that's another golden piece of information. So I remember, I think it was Stephen Fry was discussing the success of Apple, and what is it that Steve Jobs did so well, different to Windows, and what Steve Jobs focused on, and actually there's even in the documentary they talk about this, is the ergonomics of Apple. It was beautiful. Do you remember, I don't know how old you are, but do you remember the first Apple PC that was this white box, right? I remember this coming out. Right? That's showing my age. But I remember this, the first Apple PC being kind of like, distributed. And it was beautiful, right? And I remember watching a video of Steve Jobs talking about how he wanted a mouse to work. He goes, I want you to be able to do it on your leg, right? So he wanted it to be super slick, basically. And what Stephen Fry was saying is that often what gets overlooked is if something is so beautiful and so easy to use, you want to use it all the time.
Yeah.
Right. And I think that's what you're pointing out here is when you've got a car or a vehicle, I don't want to say car, when you've got a vehicle that is just lovely to drive, you want to drive it all the time. And so naturally, you're going to want to be working more. You're going to be happier on the road. You're going to, so I think that is definitely something for someone who does have a fleet of any sort to really take into account, that your employees will enjoy working more as a result of having a better working environment, which, as you say, is a driver. You are a driver. So that could be your BT lines, that could be engineering, that could be anything, right? So I think that's a really, really important point. And actually, I think that's an important point even beyond EV charging stations, even beyond the cars, having a nicer office environment. And that's what Google do so well. So if you look at these big companies, biggest companies in the world, what do Google do in terms of having their offices? Well, basically live at your office. You've got your pool tables and your ping pong, and you've got cafes and basically everything at work. So it's such a nice place to be. Why do I ever want to leave? Which means you're always on point to work. So I think that's a really, really, really important point, which I personally think gets overlooked quite a lot. And I've noticed that, that's, as an agency, and you look at, conversion rate optimization, that is the difference between a high converting website and a low converting website. If you're on a website that looks really nice and it's really nice to navigate and it's really easy to read, well, then you'd actually want to be on that website more. And so your bounce rate goes down, all the rest of it. So there's so many things that come from that. And the impact of having good ergonomics is on every level. All right. So I think that's an absolute key point that will make a huge impact that could very easily get overlooked as part of your decision-making criteria in switching over to a nice fleet of EV, of electric vehicles, right? Having a nice fleet of them. So I think that's a fascinating point. And so when you're kind of dealing with a new business who is, thinking about making this transition, I can totally see that there's some really major selling points, right? You've got an enormous saving on money, potentially, depending on the scenario of the company. You even could get paid by the grid. You have obviously a better working environment for your staff. There's potentially some tax advantages. I know that they've diminished over the past like three years or something. They've diminished, but there is still some tax advantages for a director. Um, and being able to win more tenders, to me, is the most important one for bigger companies looking to win tenders. Or even if you're a smaller company, you've never gone for a tender and your thinking is about getting into tenders. I mean, nothing's going to accelerate your business faster than winning a tender. Even if you don't know how you're going to fulfill the promise after, winning the tender is, you know, that's big business, right? So if you're wanting to accelerate your business, get into tender writing, and if that can help you win the tender, then absolutely, that should be a key priority for you. So to me, unless I have financial implications that prevent me from making some kind of transition now, it doesn't make any sense to me why someone wouldn't choose EV charging unless there's financial implications. I understand that someone might not be ready. The cash flow isn't working. All the money is often the biggest criteria for making any decision. Not taking into account that you could be saving money and also, even cash flow perspective, you might be able to forecast yourself going, well, if our petrol costs monthly are this, but we're saving this, actually, even if we don't have the cash flow, we will have the cash flow and we can factor that in. Right. So there would be ways of doing potentially. So what are the objections? What are the objections that come up? Like if it's not money?
The one that once generally, if I'm having a lengthy chat with people about this stuff, which does happen, and go through all the stuff like, oh, but they're not actually greener. Yeah, we can solve that one. Oh, but the batteries degrade, and what happens to them afterwards? Okay, they get put into battery storage systems, so they don't go just into landfill. Yeah, and on and on and on. So you get through all the stuff that all the objections people have, and they're just left with, oh yeah, but I like the sound of the engine. We're like, fine, if that's it. Like honestly, that is the only thing that it doesn't replicate. Ferrari tried it when they launched a model. I can't remember the name of it.
And they put a speaker in.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that was the only one that comes back to, all right, fine. If that's the only thing, you're prepared to pay so much more money, and over time, imagine how much more difficult it's going to become to get to petrol filling stations. So over the next few years, these are being converted at a huge rate into electric forecourts. So you're going to become that convenience of, oh, I'm on red, but there'll be a petrol station nearby. Are you sure? Like, and what's the cost of that going to do as soon as the underlying demand is going? Where do you think that's going to head? So all of these sorts of things, like if it comes down to that, you just love the sound of the engine so much, fine. Like, I don't think anyone that's involved in this industry is anti-cars so much that they want to see all of them off the road right now. There are beautiful cars out there, and there is nothing to say that if people love that classic vintage car, or even, like they've got an old Mini Cooper running or whatever it is, absolutely fine. Keep it. But that shouldn't be the vehicle that you're doing the vast majority of journeys in, because it's more expensive, it's uneconomical, there's and bad on the environment. Keep it as a weekend run around or something like that.
So the rebuttal to that objection then is keep it, just don't use it every day. And funnily enough, that relates back to the beginning of the podcast where you were talking about your electronic cigarettes.
Yeah.
Don't quit. Just transition, right? So keep your morning one, keep your dinner one, and then have your electric one during the day. Isn't it amazing how sales training stays with us, whatever industry you're in, because it is the same objection and it's the same rebuttal. And that is fascinating. Absolutely fascinating. But I think you're absolutely right in saying that, because for the petrol heads in the world, like Jeremy Clarkson, for example, that is one of the objections he talks about in whether it's Top Gear or Grand Tour. He talks about, but he loves the sound of an engine. And so he finds it really hard, even the idea, to fathom the idea having to let go of the sound of an engine. So I think that that's a very, very, very good piece of advice, which is you keep your lovely engine, but just use it at the weekend. And the reality is the more and more because the thing that I've noticed with our second car is that it is so beautiful to drive. Like I absolutely, when it's an electric, it is so comfortable, and the gizmos you get now are just unbelievable. I'm like, every time I get in the car, I'm like, this is amazing environment. And then like as I'm driving, I go, it's like a rocket ship. It's just an amazing driving experience. I genuinely love driving an electric car. I think it's absolutely fantastic. And but at the same time, I'm still a car guy, right? So I still get the other, right? So I think that that's a really, really clever way of overturning that objection. And I would imagine that objection only doesn't come up for the fleet. That comes up for the director, right?
Yeah.
That's the owner of the company going, I'm not changing it, right?
When you're down to business decisions, you try and take personal emotion out of it, right? At the director level, you might still want some personal sort of dress on how the business then goes forward and presents itself. And that's fine, absolutely fine. And don't get me wrong, like I say, I've never been excited by cars in that way, but there is a magic to the way that a vehicle's engine works, right? I understand why people get so excited about it. Just never connected with me personally. But that's why we're not saying they should be rubbed off the face of the earth. It's about saying that it's just so unnecessary. And if you think about it this way as well, if the flip, if reality was flipped and you were going from a system where you never have to go to a fuel station because you've already filled up, you basically got a fuel station on your driveway, you filled it to 100% overnight whilst you were sleeping, you go out, do your day in a quiet, safe, comfortable driving environment, paying very little for it. And then someone said, no, now you've got to have a loud, dirty, expensive vehicle, which we're going to move you into instead. People would say, well, what the hell's that about? That doesn't make any sense. You've got to go out of your way to go and fuel it. No, thanks. But it's just because what we've been used to over the years, people think that people have accepted that as the normal, and change is always scary and different, right? But once people realize fun to drive, it's nice and safe, it's a lovely environment to be in, and cheaper in almost all circumstances now, it all becomes no-brainer arguments, unless you just love the wizardry of the engine so much that you don't want to be removed from that entirely, and that's still fine.
That is great. That's great. I think I was just remembering. So before the invention of Netflix or anything similar, and there was standard television, right? And I was talking about this with someone recently, saying about, and and they laughed at me because I said, "Oh, the luxury of not having to choose what to watch, right? Because actually, there's a pain involved in going. We're traipsing through. I mean, we pay for all of them, so we got like 5 apps, right? Now TV, Prime, Netflix, Disney. I've even got Paramount, right? So it's literally 5 things and going, God. But actually, if that didn't exist now, and it was only 10, it would feel like such a pain. It would be like, oh God, I have to watch EastEnders because it's the only thing that's on. Like, Jesus, like this is awful. Or having to go back to VHS. I mean, that would be just, oh, it's not working. Oh, the things come out again. Oh, it's in the bin. It's just an absolute nightmare. So you're right. Once you've gone to something that's electric, and then if you had to go back where and I think it's a great point to not even have to go to a petrol station. If you never had to go to a petrol station, because there's always something that people have to do, right? And normally it's going to be before work, so it's a rush and having to factor in. There's all these things you have to think about just at the idea of having to feel like, when am I going to do it? When am I going to run out? Where am I going to do it? When am I going to factor it into my daily schedule? When's it not going to be too busy at the petrol station? Like, if there's another pandemic, is everyone going to go and try and buy more petrol? Like, is all the petrol going to run out? Like, you never have to think of that again. Right? It's like all of that has completely disappeared. I'd be amazed if they ever went, electricity's run out. Like, that's it. All power stations, all of them have stopped working. But it's just very, very unlikely to happen, right? So I think for me, that would be another selling point, is the fact that I never need to go to petrol. I had to go to the petrol station the other day. I was like, oh, this is a bore, and then having to factor it in, like going, okay, well, I finish a work call here and I'm going to the gym there, and then I've got to be back for this, so it doesn't matter what day you do it. You're always going to have to try and factor it into your day, because normally everyone's schedule, typically speaking, especially when you're working, is full. Right? Yes. So that's a really interesting point. So I think the last thing that I would kind of want to explore there is, so what is the market like, right? So if we're 20, I keep looking at the calendar to remind myself what year it is. So it's 2025, right? So we've got new legislation coming in 2030. So you're 5 years away. So 5 years feels like a very small amount of time left to start making the transition. So what is as a market, from your perspective and from your experience talking to people, what's people's attitude? Are people not thinking, God, I need to get this done? Or is it on the later base, like I'll do it later? Or what's that like?
So there is a mix out there, and I would actually say, so caveat this by saying I think the 2030 ban and the reconfirmation of that by the government is a largely good thing, right? I'm not anti it, but I think what having a ban has done is get people's backs up and say, oh, well, I'm going to buy a new internal combustion engine vehicle on the last day that I possibly can, so I can drive it for as long as possible. Because people instantly get anxious and want to sort of rebel against anything that they're told to do, right? What we actually found was the market is growing at such a rate, regardless of that ban, that it's going to naturally find itself there anyway. And the last couple of percent, I mean, you're talking a few vehicles on the road, is not going to have the detrimental impact of any major change, right? It's getting the 80-90% of vehicles that do journeys that don't need to be done in a petrol engine or a diesel engine off the road. And that's naturally happening anyway, because the vehicles are coming online at cheaper rates. We've got more choice on the market of different market segments of vehicle out there. You drive a camper van, you've got a pickup truck, there's all stuff, but pretty much everything out there now has an electric equivalent. And there are so many of the vehicle manufacturers which have either said, we're not producing any more internal combustion engine vehicles, or this is the performance range. It doesn't do anything else. Like this is the electric range now. So it's naturally moving in that way. And then you've got the charging market, which is growing up just ahead of demand, so that people can feel that there is charging infrastructure out there if they need it. So it's that mindset thing. People like to think about the worst case scenario. I can't get an electric vehicle. Why can't you get an electric vehicle? Because it doesn't go far enough. Well, how far do you travel on a normal day? Most people's daily journey is around 20 miles. You can easily do that in an electric vehicle. You can drive for a couple of weeks without recharging it. But people think about, oh, I need to go and visit Auntie Joan in Scotland once a year. All right. Well, would you normally stop for a toilet break on the way? Yeah, absolutely. Stop and fill up whilst you're recharge whilst you're at the service station, and then you're on your way again. And that's it. That's your difficulty gone. So the trouble is having that. It's a ban has made people. It's got people's backs up, and it would have been nice if the market just got there naturally anyway, which it will do.
Or you do like they did with the gas and electric. You just make it so fucking expensive. It just is not a plausible option anymore, right? So, because people learn through their pockets, right? So if you suddenly make petrol and diesel £6 a litre, everybody will move to electric vehicles, right? It will just be an immediacy. But that's interesting. Yeah, it's interesting to learn about the mindset of the buyer and what are some of the things that impact that. Because yes, I can imagine that being quite frequent, where someone doesn't want to be told what to do, right? They don't want to be forced into making that decision. I think it's quite normal to have some level of rebelliousness when you're going, no, you have to do that. You go, well, no, I don't want to do that. I don't have to do it. Yeah. So that's interesting. So how do you overturn that objection? I understand how you can overturn the objection of like, well, I drive to Scotland once a year to go see Auntie, right? And all those things you can factor in, and all that makes total sense. And in general, there is an answer to everything. And by the sounds of it, the majority of it is all just misinformation. It's a lack of education, right? So really, the sales process for you is education. It's
It's
education,
education.
education, education,
Yes.
education. Um, but it's not education when it comes to dealing with someone's disgruntled mindset around being told what to do. So how do you react to that? How do you what is it you can say?
The two ways of, well, there's a couple of ways of looking at it, I suppose. But one is that it's a ban on new vehicle sales. It's not a ban on these things still existing on the road. So you can, again, back to the previous argument, you can still have your vintage car, or even the new car that you purchased in 2029 that you absolutely love. You can still drive that. It's not, no one's going to stop you driving it. There, there might be some more restrictions come in about where you can drive it. Clean air zones. I know there was one that got cancelled the other day. It was at Manchester. But there are going to be more of those turn up. Like if you're driving in central London, that price is just going to go up and up and up for driving internal combustion engines, or be removed entirely, your ability to drive in those areas. But this is the other thing. If you're someone that thinks, and we chatted before about people wanting to make a better life for themselves, then by extension, you want to make a better life for the people around you and your children, if you're lucky enough to have them. Wider environmental issues, climate change, right? That's a big, scary thing that no one individual can do anything about on a grand scale. It's about the little things that you do. People recycle because otherwise you're going to get charged by the council, but it might be that you actually think, no, it's quite good that gets reused. I don't want my glass bottle or my tin can just sat in refuse. That's horrible. But it's the same thing when you look at local air quality. That's the direct impact that people have. Do you want your children going to school in an environment that is surrounded by polluting vehicles? And you know, when you turn up and you've got that smell, that's really strong. Who wants their kids breathing that? Do you want your family breathing that as you're walking around trying to enjoy a day at the weekend? No. This is about being able to say what I can impact my own local environment that I'm going around and making a better impression and making a better impact with, by moving something which doesn't have a tailpipe emission. That's a big difference that people can make as well.
I think that's a very good important point, because I know for myself, I really notice air quality, and in fact, it puts me off going to London.
Yeah.
So I actively choose not to go to London as often as possible, because I notice the level, the poorness to the air that I'm breathing in. And a lot of time, the next day will have black in my nose. You know, it will be the soot from whether it's, I don't know where it comes from, whether it's a tube station, whatever it is, but there'll be soot in there, and that fucking grosses me out. Right? I think it's just gross. And so I point out to my daughter, when we go to the countryside, I'll actively say to her, go, just breathe and
Yeah.
smell the difference, because you really can tell the difference. And interestingly, there was a huge impact when COVID happened. Was the air quality went up so much because no one was out in their cars, and so people who are currently alive in this day and age, and in the world we live in, have a direct experience of what happens when you take all the cars off the road.
Yeah.
The air quality is significantly and noticeably better. And I think that promotes, even if it's not you personally as an individual, that can promote the choice of making the ban. May not like being told what to do, but do you agree that it's better for your local environment? Right? And I think that is a very clever way of turning the objection, because it's different to normal objection handling, right? Because you're having to give somebody a new perspective, which in some instances is painting a picture, right? So if we talk about sales techniques, then what you're doing is you're painting a picture of what is it like being surrounded by soot and gas and fumes and, all the time. And I live on a main road, right? So in front of me is the main road. So I'm really, really recognizing it. I really recognize it. And then painting a picture of what it's like being fumeless, right?
Yeah.
And the fumelessness, I think if you're not using it already, I would suggest add in COVID. Do you remember what it was like going outside? Right?
Yeah.
Do you add that in already? Is that something that you say
I
to
haven't
people?
done actually.
But
No.
I would add that in because
Yeah.
it's everybody who's currently alive has that in their direct experience. It's very difficult to paint a picture when if somebody lives in the city all the time, never goes to the countryside, all they know is bad fumes, right? That's all they're aware. So it's really hard to make the direct experience going, oh, I can't really remember the difference because I can't remember the last time I went to the countryside. Everybody will remember COVID. Yeah. And probably even more so in London, right? Because the impact, the difference of the impact would have been so significantly greater. I went to Delhi in India, right, once, and we traveled around. So we went to Delhi and we traveled around. When we got back, before I was catching the flight, I was there for another couple of days. I couldn't wait to leave. I love Delhi. So to put that out there first, I absolutely love it. I love the hustle and bustle. It's really peaceful. It's not like a stressful hustle and bustle. It's like everyone's busy, but everyone's relaxed. It's a really interesting environment. The thing that I couldn't stand was the air pollution. And I could smell this like burning plastic or whatever it was. It smelled like burning plastic, whether it was or not, I have no idea. But it was impacting me so much. I felt consistently suffocated. It felt like I was really genuinely not getting enough oxygen to my lungs. I was like, I don't know how people are living here. Genuinely, I didn't know, I wouldn't be able to live there permanently. Absolutely not. And so that was the most extreme example in my personal experience of what really poor air quality is like. And probably the best example that I've ever had is during COVID.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a really, really interesting thing to put to people, I think. You're right. It's so directly relatable because unless you're able to say, you know, take the family on holiday to Yorkshire or Centre Parks or wherever it is to get away in the countryside and breathe that clean air. Well, yeah, okay. Then why not have that become your daily reality,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
It's such a manageable thing within your control to be changing and be part of changing. It's not this big, scary climate change thing it feels so far away for people that people just, governments yap on about it, but it's not something that's directly relatable for a lot of people.
And making it mandatory is not a bad thing because just changing your individual car ain't going to make that much difference. But forcing everybody to change their car will make a enormous countrywide benefit. I don't know if this is happening globally or not, but if it's only happening in the UK, well, that's the whole of the UK having a major, major impact. I know that there are some arguments going, oh, well, the CO2 of building one of these brand new EV electric cars is worse, right, than buying like a secondhand petrol car. Uh, I'm not going to go into the statistics for whether or not that's right or wrong. What I'm interested in is what is the selling point to the individual? How am I directly, personally impacted, right?
Yeah.
So whether the global impact of the CO2 of building a new car is better or worse, in my personal direct experience, is completely irrelevant, but the local air quality is not. Right? Because so if we go back to, what is it that sells things to people? Well, it's how it influences me personally, because we're all in our little bubbles of me, me, me. Well, it personally directly impacts my local air quality. So that would be, I would expect, the number one selling point.
I'm actually reminded of an example going back to my electronic cigarettes days of there was a day where I was stood outside a shop front. It was a gloomy Tuesday or something, hundreds of people already saying, no, bugger off to me and everything under the sun, right? But then there was one, and this one woman really sticks out in my mind. Remember her quite vividly all these years later. And she was effing and blinding at me for no, I hadn't even like made eye contact with her. She just went at me and let her say her piece, and then eventually managed to get her to calm down and tell me why she was angry at me. And it was nothing to do with me personally. She thought I was selling real cigarettes on the street. And it turned out that she'd had a tragedy in the family. I think it was her son had died of lung cancer, and her daughter was still smoking as well, and she was upset that she was going down the same path. And so, by understanding the problem that she had, I was able to actually, and this wasn't like me, oh, wonderful salesman, but I actually managed to sell her some of the products at the end of that conversation because she was able to understand that her anger wasn't directed at me. where I was actually in a position to try and help her daughter that she was worried about as well. And she was upset about the previous situation. So if you kind of uh, translate that into what's happening now, anger around getting rid of your vehicle that you've known for years and your comfortable way of life, going to petrol stations and everything that you're used to, it's an anger response. And it's just about just bring the temperature of that down, understand what the reason behind it is. And actually there might be a better offering at the end of it if you just let that sort of weigh into your thought process.
Which is, it's fascinating. Thank you for bringing that story, because that is the magic of the first part of any rebuttal handle, which is smiling and agreeing. Completely understand where you come from. Maybe smiling in that instance isn't appropriate, but just agreeing. Something that I've taught people before is apologize, even if you have nothing to apologize for. Because just by doing so, immediately all the defenses go down and then they become receptive to the point they probably will apologize to you, right? That is the likely outcome. So by going, totally understand where you come.
Yeah.
Immediately, all of that goes to, okay, I'm being heard. And that's what it's down to, right? Is the person feeling they're being received, heard, seen, all those types of things, right? And then once they're in a receptive mode, then when you deliver something that makes sense, they're able to hear and receive you back. But coming with conflict never works, because nobody's listening to each other. And I used to, when I first started teaching sales, I used to say to my team, I'd be like, people would talk about, you're looking for the positive customer in the day, right? So you might have had that when you were doing, you're looking for the positive customer. What is the positive customer, right? Now, I was saving people money on their gas and electric.
Yeah.
So everybody qualified, right? In general, is in other sales, not everyone qualifies. Like electronic cigarettes are only for people who qualify, which means that they smoke, right? Or someone in their family smokes. But everybody qualified. So it wasn't a case of we have to qualify, except from maybe if they're in contract or not. It was more a case of you just need to find the people who are willing to listen to you. And so what I would do is I would just be looking with such acute attention at their facial expressions, their body language, to tell whether or not is that person even willing to listen. And if they weren't willing to listen, I'm off. Like, instantly. I didn't spend a second where I wasn't wanted. But amazingly, when you use these types of techniques, somebody who appears not to be willing to listen, by using a technique such as understanding where they're coming from, they then become willing to listen to you. So that's what sales techniques do, is they help the other person as much as anything else. They help the other person, or helps you to help the other person to become more receptive to what you have to say.
And one of the really useful techniques I used to use a lot, and this only works in this sort of B2C environment, of course, that is breaking the physical barrier, and obviously keeping it appropriate. A light tap on the shoulder, or if you're handing someone a product, make sure you touch their hand whilst you're passing it to them. Anything that enables you to have that just brief physical interaction. There is some sort of like mental magic that happens there that really breaks down the barrier. And this is why shaking hands with someone, when you walk into a room, it really helps, and make eye contact, of course, everyone knows that. But yeah, breaking that physical barrier is really,
that is interesting. I haven't actually heard that before, but I can totally resonate with that being true. Something that we were taught when shaking someone's hand, interestingly, as you just said that, was when you shake their hand, if you would your other hand hold their elbow like that, immediately they feel in a state of trust and warmth towards you. But if you were to do, what was the opposite? That was the thing that we were taught to do. There was one we were taught not to do because it had the opposite effect. So people would then get into a defense. So it wasn't just about touch. It was touch in the right way that would make someone feel receptive to you. And actually, when someone does it to me, if they were to hold my elbow as they shake my hand, I can feel energetically that my body's going, yeah. I'm willing to talk to this person. It's a fascinating experience, but I think you're absolutely right. I wonder how much that has changed over the years, because it's been a long time since I've been in that environment, to see whether or not that's acceptable? Is that something that, I don't know. I don't know if that's still a thing or not, I,
People don't, particularly post-COVID, I think people don't really appreciate physical contact, or at least they're not used to it anymore. So the idea of someone, shaking their hand or putting a hand on tapping their arm, maybe that's something that people are less receptive to now. I'm genuinely interested if there's any feedback.
Yeah, exactly.
Listeners.
Yeah. I have no idea. I think in the people have spoken to me about this before around in the UK in general, physical contact is probably one of the least
Yeah.
across, in terms of all the other countries, and I've noticed it when I've traveled that physical, like I'm half Spanish, like in Spain, it's normal to give a kiss and a kiss, right? That is the normal thing to do. And it would be really inappropriate not to do it. Right. And people are a lot more touchy feely. So that, it's a lot more hug and, that's a very kind of normal. Whereas here in the UK, that is not normal. It's far, far less normal. So I think there's lots of cultural differences with it as well. But I don't know the difference since COVID to whether or not that has had a global impact, even in other countries that are more innately normal as a culture for that to happen. So yeah, that would be a fascinating thing. Um, so I'd like to ask you, like I asked in my first one. So if I'll use the same line, if someone could not be asked to listen to this whole podcast, and they go, that sounds interesting. I ain't listening to the whole thing, and they just wanted to go to the final page of a book to find out what it was all about and what are the key takeaways. What would you say the key takeaways are from today?
So particularly when we're looking at the electric vehicle discussion that we had, I think people should question what they're presented with. And once you scratch below that surface of here's what the media has told me, you will actually find that there is almost every situation, there is a perfect reason for you to make that transition to an electric vehicle. And it will maybe depend on what's money in your pocket. It might be future generations. It might be the fact that there is some other local incentive or even the tech wizardry that sits inside the vehicles that just really excites you. But don't be put off by bans or the talks of climate change and all the big scary stuff that's out there. Just let this be a real personal experience for you that makes a difference to your life and those around you.
I love that. And I think the key takeaways from a sales perspective that I would point out, which I think were some absolute golden nuggets. One is the tenders, right? So that to me, that's the biggest one. So if you are a company that does have a fleet, however great or small, by having electric vehicles, it helps you to win tenders. That is such a big reason to do it, right? Monetary basis, that's a big reason. Second to that would be the savings. And I think that I would be amazed if it doesn't exist, but I'm sure you could calculate anyway what those savings would be. So what would this savings entail? And if you add that over a number of years, what is your overall savings? So then you reduce your overall costs and so on. So I think looking at the savings and looking at winning tenders are two major reasons to transition across. If nothing else resonated from today's podcast, you're like the rest of it, those two on their own should be enough of a reason to make the switch now and not wait. You don't need to wait until, don't be panicking 2030. Who knows? There could be a shortage in 2030 and everything's more expensive. Make the decision today. And the impact that the ban will have on your local environment directly benefits you, right? It's a direct benefit. So embrace that change. It isn't a negative. I wonder if people had the same thing when recycling became mandatory, right? So recycling became mandatory. I wonder if people are like, oh, no, I have to have a second bin in my house and I have to take it out. I have two bins I have to now manage all the rest of it. Probably it was the same level of resistance, right? I would imagine. And I know that every council is different. I know in my local council that you get fined if you don't do it, right? So and actually what we found is it's really easy. Haven't had any issues doing it whatsoever. So I think when you can switch your attitude going, well, actually there's a direct benefit. And if you're a petrol head, I think it was a wonderful piece of advice is keep it. Have your cigarette in the morning and have your cigarette at night, right? Keep it for when you're wanting to have a journey at the weekend or whatever. Don't use it day to day. Keep your love affair for a car if that's what you've got, right? I think that that is really sound advice. You don't have to make the whole transition straight away. And I think that advice relates to me too, right? Exactly the same, because I love cars. I really, really, really love cars. And for me, it's not about the sound of the engine. It's the looks. I think that most for me, there are a few out there that I'm just because I like BMWs. I'm like the new BMWs that are electric. Most of them don't look as good, in my opinion, to the petrol. So if you're BMW and you're listening to this, please design better looking electric cars. So to me, the same thing reflects. But at the same time, having said that, I absolutely love driving electric cars because it really is such a nicer experience. So I think that there's been some really great and useful information there, and some things to take away. And from a sales perspective, I think it was really fascinating to look at how the first sales position pitch was still the same in your business now, however many years later, that pitch of like, keep it now, and make the transition. You don't have to quit straight away. I think that it was fascinating to see. And the importance of learning sales, if you want to run a business one day, that is going to impact you for the rest of your life. Even if you're doing it at nighttime, weekends, whenever you can, get yourself a sales job, whatever it is, because it's going to impact your life forever. Right? I consider every job sales. Even if you're a CTO, you're selling to your engineers, how are you going to develop something? Why are you selling to your CEO? Why you need to develop it in that particular way? So every job is sales. I think it makes sense, but it was such a good example of how that first sales job was directly the same. So really, really fascinating. So some really great takeaways. So thank you so much for joining me on the podcast today. And I would say to anyone who is thinking about transitioning to electric or EV and hasn't made that change or hasn't made the decision, get in touch with this guy. Clearly, and if you've listened to this podcast, he knows what he's talking about, and it's going to save you hours of research and be able to make sure that you get the right infrastructure that's going to be most beneficial to you. So get in touch with this guy because he really knows what he's talking about. But thank you so much for joining me.
It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you very much for having me.